Hey, welcome to Tuesday Talks, everybody. I'm your host, John Robinson, and we are here with you live every Tuesday afternoon, 1 p.m. Pacific time, 2 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. That's where we're broadcasting from today. And of course, 3 and 4 and 5, depending on what time zone you're in. But this is a broadcast that is live. And so we don't always promise that everything's going to go perfect, but we promise that we will be real and genuine. And we also promise that we will answer your questions. So if you get on and ask questions, then we will do the best we can to provide answers for you all. And so I want to jump right into today because I have a guest that's going to be coming on just a minute. And I want to lay a little bit of groundwork and just ask a question. And my question is this: how many of you all that are on here watching this show, whether you're live with us or watching the replay later, how many of you all have ever thought about new construction as an investment model? New construction as an investment model. Now, if you're here with us today, there's a pretty good chance, I'm just taking a wild stab at things, but there's a pretty good chance that you are interested in some way, shape, or form real estate investing, right? So that's probably why you're watching this. or maybe you just really like me. I know there's a couple of fans out there. You guys just watch everything I do, which I appreciate you. But I hope that you are learning, at the very least. I hope, even if it's just all about me, you like me. I hope it's just kind of as a side note, you're learning a lot about real estate. And as real estate investors, especially I should say real estate investors, everybody right now is watching the housing market, and everyone's kind of asking this question, like, have things slowed down? You've got buyers that are hesitating to purchase. This is not, of course, in every market, but for the most part, buyers are really pretty slow to buy right now. It's not like it was in 2000 and 17, 18, 19. Everybody's really, really tight on things right now, right? Sellers are holding on. Why are sellers holding on? Well, naturally because of interest rates. So interest rates are keeping pressure on affordability. And on the surface, it might feel like things are kind of stuck. And let's just call it what it is, right? The market has definitely taken a little bit of a slowdown. Real estate markets around the country have reported significant differences between where they were last year, especially where they were a couple of years ago, and where they are now. So it feels like things are stuck, but here's the part that a lot of people are really not taking into consideration. All they're looking at is from the lens of like just a really simplistic view of the market and of rates. But this is what I wanted to kind of just point out to you guys. If you haven't thought about this before, consider this. When put it this way, whenever it feels like things are stuck, whenever it feels like the economy is not doing that great, and it might be true, all those things, what happens is the homeowners stop selling, maybe not even because they want to, but I think there's a lot of people right now, just frankly, they're not about to go sell a property that they have a low interest rate on. So there's that aspect. And then there's also, they stop selling because of the fact that the buyers are not necessarily buying like they were. And so what happens is when existing homeowners stop selling, inventory obviously gets tight, and we're already in an inventory deficit, even though I know that it seems kind of crazy to imagine, but we're actually short on housing around the country. And so when everything gets tight and existing homeowners stop selling, then new construction becomes kind of a pressure valve, so to speak. It becomes the only real way to create inventory in an already constrained market. Does that make sense? By the way, if you guys are with me, and I like to have participation. So if you're jumping on right now, go ahead and tell us where you're watching from. If you can, if you're driving right now, listening in, obviously keep your hands at 10 and 2. Stay focused on the road and just listen in. But if you can, jump on, tell us where you're watching from, tell us what's going on. But getting back to this idea about the market and creating opportunity, creating inventory in a market that is not really growing inventory. In fact, we're actually at a deficit. I think here in the Treasure Valley, I could be wrong. I'm going to ask Zach about this in a few minutes, but I think in the Treasure Valley, we're like 20,000 units short of where we need to be. Okay. So if you're with us and you're watching, this is going to be true in your market too, but I'm just going to be speaking a little bit from the market we're in here in Treasure Valley, Idaho. And, the inventory is constrained. And the thing is building new construction homes is a way to create more inventory in a really restricted market. But there's also this other tension that builders right now are getting squeezed because land costs are up, way farther up than they were when my wife and I built our first house here in Idaho. I'll talk a little bit about that in a bit, but we built our first house here in Idaho in 2002. Things were a little different back then. So land costs have gone up. Materials are still high priced because of everything that happened during COVID. Boy, the labor market is tight, right? It's hard to get new people to come in and stick with the job. And of course, the buyers make their purchases. If you guys didn't know this, buyers make their purchases based, for the most part, on the monthly payment. So, I always joke around and say, hey, listen, I'll pay $1 million more than your property is worth or than you're asking, so long as you'll give me the payments, structure that I want, right? So when buyers are going to the bank, getting their pre-approved for a loan, they go out and go house shopping. The big factor is, what is the mortgage payment every month? So what happens when you have all this stuff happening? Well, margins get really, really tight, okay? projects get really risky. You have to really look at it and make sure it's a good project. And a lot of investors, frankly, they're just kind of staying out of the development game altogether. They're not in development. They're not actually out there doing this stuff. But let me ask you a question, okay? Those of you guys that are watching, what if the opportunity isn't in avoiding development? I mean, that's obviously, maybe you're like, I never even thought about development. I never thought about new construction. That's not for me. That's for the big investors. That's for construction builders and contractors and all this stuff. What if it isn't in avoiding it, but in understanding it better than everybody else? What if the people who know how to read zoning laws and spot infill opportunities and navigate entitlements and things like that are actually sitting on, those people, I believe, are sitting on one of the biggest advantages in today's market. And if you've ever looked at a piece of land and thought, I know there's something here, I just don't know what to do with it. Have you ever had that thought? Raise your hand if you ever had that thought. I know there's probably something I could do with this property, but I'm not really sure what to do with it. If you've ever thought that, comment land in the comments. Okay, hey, there's Tanya. Tanya is watching today from Chehalis, Washington, doing a walkthrough, she says. Cool. Tanya, always good to have you on here. If you guys have ever thought about like just dirt and looked at it, I wonder if you could build something on there, and you kind of get your creative juices flowing and you're looking at it, comment the word land. I just want to see who's out there who's been thinking about this. And by the way, if you're not watching live, that's okay. Drop a comment in there because I'm always going to come back and read the comments after the fact. So the fact of the matter is that most people have probably had that thought before. I say most people, I'm saying real estate investors, our audience, most of you guys have probably thought before, boy, I wonder if I could do something with that piece of dirt, right? You've probably thought that. Yes, Nancy says yes. And of course, if you're living in an area where you know there's a lot of stuff going on, it's kind of booming and zooming, then you're like, man, I think you could probably do something. I could build a house there. We could do an apartment complex. Maybe you could do some retail. But the fact of the matter is that you've probably had those thoughts, which is exactly why I've brought in a special guest today. And I'm super excited to introduce my friend here, Zach. Now, I say my friend, and I say that we're kind of like Facebook friends right now. So right now, I'm going to bring Zach onto the stage and give him a little bit of an introduction. If you guys are wanting to, if you're excited about real estate, development, housing, you guys need to get about I want to know if you guys are excited about this today. So I want to just give him a little bit of an introduction real quickly. I met Zach Madsen. He was referred to me here in Boise on a project that I was looking at. It was a tear down house, bigger lot in a really busy area. It seems like, okay, I know we could do something here. And I was super impressed. I seen him on Facebook. I kind of dropped in on some of the things that he does, but I had the chance to meet him on one of the deals that I was looking at. And what was really impressive about Zach is, first of all, he actually showed up and did what he said he was going to do. That right there was huge. I always love it whenever people actually show up to appointments. And Zach kind of, he came in, he had a lot of spreadsheets, and he had some different figures, and he really just gave me several different ideas on what I could do with this one piece of property. In fact, we're still working on that particular property, but bringing Zach in, Zach is a Boise-based developer, builder, someone who's been in the real estate space, particularly in the infill development space for a long time. Now, he probably has a story similar to a lot of you guys. I think I can remember my first real estate investment book that I bought was by Brandon Turner, of course, Bigger Pockets back then. And I remember buying about, making money in real estate, multifamily, and just reading these books and really devouring this stuff. And this is back before there was a ton of it on YouTube, right? So this is probably 10, 11 years ago now. There wasn't nearly as much saturation as there is now. Nowadays, it's not a matter of finding someone. It's about, like, which one do you pick, right? Because there's so many different people out there. But Zach started going to seminars. He started kind of watching what things were doing and watching how things were going. Then he did a house hack. I'm going to let him tell some of his story. But he got into, I want to just say, Zach's done the house hacking. He's done flipping. He's done probably done some wholesaling. He's done a little bit of everything. But the area that he really settled into was land and zoning and development and infill lots, to the point that, and I don't know if this is something he should, he's going to be proud of or embarrassed to say, but he's read the zoning code here in the Treasure Valley area multiple times. Okay, so that alone should tell you something about Zach. So, Zach, I want to just have you on the show today and say welcome. Thanks for coming on, and I appreciate you taking the time to be here with us. So, go ahead and tell us a little bit more about yourself. What are you working on right now, Zach? I know you got something big right now you're working on. What's something that you're working on right now that you want to tell everybody about? And just give us a little bit of introduction.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. And yeah, I'm happy to jump into my background as well. But yeah, basically last July, I launched what I call my infill deal list. And basically I present everyday investors opportunity to buy basically manageable infill development parcels from anywhere from single lot splits and single family home builds all the way up to these mid-sized developments. And so since launching that, we've have a handful of clients and about over 25 units in the development pipeline that we're currently getting entitled, and then some of them will start construction here this fall, or probably more likely like this winter. But yeah, that's kind of how what we have going on, and I'm super excited about it. There's a couple projects in particular that I'm really excited about.
Right on. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, and maybe even the one that you and I are looking at together. But I mean, tell us a little bit about Zach Madsen. Like who are you? I mean, you had an opportunity, if I remember right, to jump into full-time real estate investing. But what was life like before that, and then what caused you to make that decision?
Yeah, so a little bit of background. So I have a very math and science oriented brain. I went to school for aerospace engineering, so like literal rocket scientist. But I decided halfway through that was not my calling, and I actually dropped out of college and basically just took a retail sales job full time that eventually got me promoted into retail management. So I did that for 10 years, and that's how I ended up in Boise. During that 10 years, I had mentors that were doing real estate. They were buying rental homes. So that's always something that was kind of at the back of my mind, and that's when I was really studying, reading, and going to seminars, and then kind of a couple years of education into that, and that's when the housing bubble burst. And so I was just kind of, put my head down and was working on my job. And then I moved to Boise and started looking for properties that I could fix up and live in. So basically my whole strategy going into it, living here, was to house hack. And so when I first moved here, I had put, 5 different offers in, and they got beat out by cash offers. Those were all fourplexes. And then finally I was able to find a duplex house hack. So I lived in one side. I essentially lived in that side for free. The other side paid my mortgage. And then a little less than 2 years after that, I bought a second one. And same story, the 1-bedroom apartment basically paid my mortgage on the other 2,000 square feet of my house. And so I did that. And then literally 4 or 5 months after that, I got fired from my job. Yeah. So, here I was, and, so that was January 6th of 2016. My goal that year was to make it through the year and quit at the end of the year. So just moved up my timeline basically by a year.
That's what you call, you talk about forced appreciation, but that's forced acceleration. Like your plan just got accelerated quickly.
Yep, exactly. So yeah, so I basically just kind of jumped into flipping full time. So I was driving for dollars. That's how I found my first my first flip property. And so that first flip, I did pretty much all of the work myself, redid the entire plumbing in the entire house. The only thing I didn't do is the roofing and the windows and the HVAC, but everything else I did myself. And then I took the profits from that and bought another one, and then bought a third one shortly after that, and kind of started rolling that. and not to get too far into the weeds, but basically while I was flipping, I tried multiple ways to scale. One was having my own remodel crew, and that was just a headache and a half. And then it was hiring GCs, and that was two headaches. And so I was kind of getting frustrated with that, realizing that I couldn't scale and also be working on houses. And there's plenty of people that were doing that, but before I kind of figured that out, I saw this opportunity in land and development, specifically infill development, that there just wasn't as much competition in that space, especially in Boise. And there was a ton of opportunity. And so I kind of both to scale, but also just in the housing market, there just wasn't enough housing. The margins were way better on new construction, I found. So that's kind of how I kind of fell into that, essentially, just kind of intentionally, but also accidentally.
So that's funny you said that, because it's my story too. Is I got into real estate accidentally. I was already in construction, and always seemed like I was always flipping something. I always had a car that I bought at an auction that I was fixing up and selling, or for a long time I was dismantling old barns around the Northwest, and I'd salvage the lumber, and I'd take a section of an old beam and turn it into a really cool fireplace mantle and install those. So I understood the concept, but never thought that I could do it in real estate. And really, even getting into real estate was almost the same thing, kind of forced into it, because you've probably heard my story, but I basically bought a house to live in, fixed it up, hadn't quite moved in yet. And this lady basically begged us to sell the house to her. Long and short of it is, we did. I thought the number that I told her that I would sell it for was ridiculous, because I was trying to chase her off, and she said yes. And I learned one of my first things is, never say your price first, right? Don't be the first one to give your price. But regardless, when I looked at that first closing, and I had that check in my hand, it was basically, at the time I was working for one of the contractors out at Intel in Oregon, and I had the equivalent of my entire year's salary plus an additional $15,000 just for fixing up this old house and selling it, and I thought, well, if I could do that accidentally, what could happen if I did it on purpose, right? And so I want to go back to, really for you, just because I think sometimes this gets missed. But you said you were, studying for literally rocket science, right? You have this experience in that, then you're into retail. You moved to a different state. You moved here to Idaho. What was it about real estate that was just like, this is the thing for me? Do you remember, was there anything in particular that you can kind of talk about a little bit, and just tell us a little bit about what you were thinking, what was going on back then?
Yeah, I think it's probably the same for a lot of people, where, you read that first real estate book and you're like, a light bulb goes off in your head. And, so mine was, I read Rich Dad Poor Dad, and it just spoke to me like, yeah, what are we doing? I didn't learn any of this stuff when I was a kid. Quite the opposite. In fact, my family was all very risk adverse to owning any kind of real estate. And so it just really clicked. And that's when I kind of decided that I wanted to own real estate and rentals. And it just kind of sparked that fire, because that Robert Kiyosaki also does a great job of, get you to buy the rest of his books, because he tells you just enough. And you have to learn more. You have to learn more. So it kind of sparked that fire. And so I, went to a bunch of seminars, read a bunch of his books, read a bunch of other books. I probably read, 25 real estate books at least, and went to probably 6 or 7 seminars before I ever bought my first deal. Looking back, I wish I would have, pulled the trigger sooner, but it ended up all working out the way it was supposed to. So.
Sorry, I think I was muted there for a second. I was with the Rich Dad Poor Dad. I think that book is probably instrumental in really getting a lot of people into real estate. But as you know, and you've experienced this, and I think other people watching this might be able to relate more to than the successful side. Real estate is not something that just happens. It's not like, oh, you just go out, you buy a property, you do a little bit of work, you sell it, you're going to make a profit every time. It's not quite like that. So I want to just ask you, like, okay, you got into real estate, but you kind of kept on feeling around different areas. You were doing some flipping, I think, for a while. You were house hacking at first, which is great. I think it's a great place for people to start, especially if you have the qualifying income and you can get the loan. But you went from house hacking to flipping, then from flipping to infill. What was it? Was there ever a time in there you're like, you know what, this real estate thing, I don't know, I guess it's not working the way I wanted it to? Or were you just constantly evolving in your growth? I want to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think it was mostly just evolving in my growth. It was always like I had this, this vision of where I wanted to be, and I was struggling to ever get there. And so, like, I think a lot of people kind of look at that in their own path, and they look at people that have been successful, and they're like, oh, well, they maybe just got lucky, or they're better than me, or whatever. And it's really not. It's real, like, everybody that's achieved any level of success in real estate, it's really just because you've made a commitment to working through all the crap and finding the pony. There's a fun story with that, but yeah, it's ultimately it's just always striving to achieve what you kind of set out to do. And so even though I would run into doors shutting or whatever, it always led to a different door that was opening. And there, if I'm being honest, there was a time where, like, I failed so hard that I was like, what do I do here? Do I just give up? And so I was seriously, like, open to giving up. And it's crazy because that was that moment in time where, like, just a little bit of hope got me the rest of the way. So, like, one little crack in the door got me the rest of the way to just go all in.
I know exactly what you're talking about right now. Yeah, I amen to that.
And that's maybe like something that a lot of people have to hear, because I think a lot of people have had that experience, whether it was recently or it was 5 years ago, or maybe people went through that housing bubble and got crushed, and maybe they did give up. But I know people that went through that and they got out of real estate completely and then swore to never invest again. And those people are in no better place today than they were 15 years ago. So
that's such a good point, Zach. I just want to stop for a second and just say, I think that a lot of people, they miss the fact that just because things went bad or badly, or just because things are going badly, that's not necessarily an indicator that that you should stop. Okay. And I'm sure you probably know Myron Golden, and Myron has some great business coaching that he does, and I'm in one of his coaching programs. But one of the things that really helped me coming from Myron was this idea that he basically says, where your intention goes, your attention will follow. Okay, so if you have these intentions of becoming someone who's going to do real estate investing, well, then your attention begins to follow that, right? You start, that's where you start really leaning into, because that's where your intention is. But then he said, and disruption always follows intention. And that just really, really helped me a lot, because my thought was, for a long time, I was like, well, this didn't go well. I did this flip and I did all this work and we were into it, for almost 5 months. And I'm lucky if I broke even, after I paid all my lenders back and paid, and really count everything up. You're like, man. And there's a tendency, I think, for a lot of people to get a little bit of resistance or get a little bit of trouble, or even just totally flop, and then just be like, that's it, that's the proof that I shouldn't have done this, or I'm never going to do this again. And I'm not saying that you should, if you're beating your head against a brick wall with your forehead and it's not cracking, that you should keep trying. Like, I think there's a fine line between being foolish, but I think there's a lot of people that just give up too soon, And part of the reason why a lot of people give up too soon is because they take a failure as this is just evidence that I shouldn't be doing this. And I'm really glad you said that, because I think there's a lot of trial and error in this business, just like probably with anything, that doesn't get talked about and celebrated, on social media. It doesn't really make for great posts. Hey, come join my mentorship. I'll tell you about all the failures I made, mistakes I made. But it is a definite part of the growth process. So, and speaking of that, you mentioned earlier that it was really trying to manage all these subcontractors, do some of the work yourself. Now you're trying to, well, I know what I'll do. I'll get a general contractor out here to do my projects, and I know exactly what you said. Now I'm just basically managing two people. I'm still managing the subs, and now I'm managing a GC too. So, again, that's all, some people it works really, really great. But in other words, you were at a spot where you were running into these issues, and you kind of just like, hey, I'm kind of hitting this ceiling with flipping, and it's just not something I'm able to scale right now. Was two questions. Number one, was scale something that you always wanted to do almost from the beginning, or was it just something that you realized after a while that you had to do? That's my first question. And then my second question is, how did you make the decision to go? How did you know to go from flipping to development? So first question, was scale an objective that you had really from the very get-go, and you just realized this is the next natural step? And then my second question is, how did you make that switch on your first deal?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when I was working my full-time job, I knew that wasn't going to be for my forever career job. I was already getting burnt out on it. So I did have in my mind that I was going to, own real estate at scale. I didn't know quite. I mean, I'm sure I had a picture of what that looked like. I think it looked at the time owning a bunch of rentals, and maybe getting into the commercial space at some point. But you can only, I knew even back then that there's only so many, single family or, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes that you can buy in a given time, with your regular income. So I always knew that was going to be a challenge, on scaling up. So I knew I was going to have to get creative. So I think even when I had my full-time job, I was always thinking that, okay, how do I scale this? Now, when I got into real estate full-time flipping, I knew that scaling was going to be a necessity if I didn't want to be swinging hammers on every single house. There's people that have that live their whole career in house flipping that, they flip 2 houses a year and they're satisfied with that because they make their 6 figures, and they turn into their regular job, and they just show up and work on a house for 6-8 hours and go home at the end of the day, and they do 2 of those a year, and they're happy. So
I would pause and say something like that. That right there is that should be all the reason. What you just said is so true, and that should be all the reason that some people need just to go ahead and jump into this. Because hey, wouldn't you rather show up and just put in your hours for yourself, and like you said, 2, maybe 3 if you're in a really tight market, but 3 deals a year, you can absolutely make a very good living flipping houses. I don't think a lot of people actually realize that. That's very, very true. I sorry to interrupt you, but like that actually is a true fact, what you just said. And so I know what you mean though, because that was like my goal. Okay, I can just flip a couple houses a year. And the more I got involved in real estate, the more I realized like, man, there's so much more potential here. But sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, I knew I wanted to scale because I just that was just something I knew I wanted to do. I wanted to essentially get to a point where I could work if I wanted to work, but didn't have to work. And 10 years later, I'm still on that journey, by the way. But it's evolved, and it's I still enjoy my life, and I actually love what I'm doing now more than I've ever loved what I do, for a few different reasons. But yeah, I think your second part of your question was basically what kind of got me to switch from flipping to development. And it's when I realized that what it was going to take to scale in flipping, By the time I was kind of starting, by the time I pivoted and bought my first development property, I realized that using leverage and using other people's money was going to be key, because you can't just, I had a stash of cash that I used to buy my first couple properties, or fund mostly my first couple properties. But to use all your own money and to be able to scale is so hard to do when you're not starting with millions. And so I realized, that, okay, I have this model that works in flipping. So now I can confidently, present it to other people that want to passively invest. And so I did that on my very last flip. But then I realized that was a great opportunity to be able to scale in development, because now instead of buying one house and flipping one house, granted it's a shorter time frame, 3 to 6 months, well, I could buy that same house with the same amount of capital, but I could create 7 houses out of it. That was my very first deal. So I could turn one house into 7 using the exact same capital. It just takes a little bit longer. So, those 7 houses took 3 years instead of, just, 3 to 6 months. But if I could, instead of buying, 5 flips at a time and essentially doing those 5 flips in 6 months and doing that again and doing 10 houses a year, I could see the pathway to be able to raise the same amount of capital, and even having more creative deals too. My very first couple deals were actually creative deals where I hardly had to bring any capital into it, and the seller financed, where you don't really get that on flips as much. So I basically saw a pathway to be able to scale by just doing a couple of deals and turning those into more houses. And to be honest too, like the opportunity I saw in new construction, number one is, at the time, I had a couple flips that were like just a pain in the butt when it came time to resale, because ultimately, you're no matter what, a flip is putting lipstick on a pig, right? So like, I got to the point where I got burnt a couple times. I had to fix a bunch of stuff that I didn't realize I had to fix. And then I'm like, okay, if I need to go into every flip and basically make it perfect, otherwise I'm going to get burnt on the tail end. So then I'm like, well, why don't I just build new? And that has its own set of problems too. But it kind of drove me towards that direction of like, okay, why don't I just start from scratch and let the people, that are good at putting lipstick on do that and deal with those problems.
Yeah, it's funny you said that, because I grew up in a construction home. So meaning I grew up, I was on a job site when I was like 10 years old, framing with my dad. I wasn't framing back then. I was just basically picking up nails and scraps and stuff, but very, very accustomed to being on a construction job site. And then my wife, she grew up in a builder's home. They built custom homes here in the Treasure Valley for years. In fact, her grandfather started the business. Her dad took it over. Her dad and mom ran the business, and then she worked in the business doing stuff. So when we got married, I was working for their family business, very, very used to new construction as like the norm. Well, fast forward, several years, life and kids and family and moving and all that stuff. And I got into that first flip that I did. Well, I did that because I knew how to do construction work. But I remember thinking, as I started working in flips, like after doing several flips in the Portland market, of course, you're buying the oldest house that you can, because that's usually the cheapest. So you think you're going to get this great deal. And it's like, the older it is, I found out the harder it was to actually get repaired. And I remember having this moment one time when I was in the middle, neck deep into something in some, crappy old house. And, you're realizing like, this is going to be more money. There goes my profit. And I was like, why in the world am I working on these old houses when like I know how to do new construction? Like, it's so much cleaner, so much more efficient, so much faster. You're dealing with it's funny because it's a house. A house is a house, right? You think, but it's a totally different type of product when you're building new and from the ground up. So I know exactly what you're talking about. So you got into your first couple of deals. Had you already been reading through the zoning code book cover to cover, or was the new zoning niche what forced you into that?
Yeah. So my very first new development deal actually never closed. I started the due diligence on it and basically got I knew I could turn it into, it was a vacant lot. Well, there was a small house on it, but I knew I could build 3 houses on it. Well, during the due diligence period, I basically found out that the neighbor up front had an easement over the land, and he actually was able to control what we could do with our property. So we could only build 2 houses. And now because we could only build 2 versus 3, that didn't pencil out. So that one never closed. That's when I kind of started reading through like a little bit of the code. And then I had another deal where I actually had to tear down a house almost completely. Essentially, it was a tear down. And so that turned into like, it was supposed to be a flip, but it turned into a new construction. And then that's where I ran into like issues with zoning. So I'm like, so I ended up just selling that as a lot. And then my third deal was the 7-house subdivision. That one's, I went basically intentionally in. And, you know, I found out during that process that essentially like what I thought I could do with the property had nothing to do with, you know, how it works in planning and zoning. So I was reading bits and pieces, and then I was kind of getting, you know, curveballs thrown at me from every different direction by every different person I talked to at planning and zoning. And so I kind of just, I just made the decision. I was gonna read it front to back, so I knew what I had going into it. Well, you know, that zoning code is like 250 pages long. And so I read it front to back like 3 separate times, all within like a few weeks for that very first development. And this is kind of while I was still getting everything thrown at me. And it was very frustrating. It was actually a very frustrating process, like talking to the planners, because what happens when you're a newbie and when you've never done a deal before, even like when you've done multiple deals. I know guys that are doing, you know, flips that are also doing land development stuff that still don't understand zoning, because what happens is you go and you have one project and it relates to this part of the code, and you'll talk to one planner, and that planner will give you like a little bit what their expertise is, and then you talk to another planner and they give you different information that seems to compete with what the first guy told you. Mm-hmm. And then that's different on a different project. Now on another project that you're looking at is completely different part of the zoning code. And so everything that you learned on the first project you looked at is completely different because it's totally different. And so you run into that all like crazy in the zoning code. And so, you know, I read it a few more times after this first project, after we got that all approved, because I ultimately, like, I realized that if I could just go in and have a really good understanding of the zoning code, and particularly the properties that I'm dealing with 80 to 90% of the time. So if I had a really good understanding going into it, it would save me a ton of time of all the back and forth that you go between all the different planners and having to change your plan every time you get feedback. And so I realized it was basically like, if I do all the work up front, I can save time and energy and hassle down the road. And so that's ultimately kind of what got me started on like, okay, I'm going to figure out the zoning code. And so I did that. Every project to this day, I still, you know, and the new zoning code changed in the end of 2023 for Boise. And so that's, you know, that's something I basically had to relearn everything because it's all different again. So that was fun. And then, you know, and then each city is different too. So like, you know, I also deal with a lot with Garden City. So Garden City and Boise are, you know, they're similar, but it's different. And so, you know, I have a really good handle on the zoning code. You know, one of my like superpowers right now is I can literally look at a property, like on an overhead, look up the address, and within 30 seconds, I know what I can do with it. Wow. And so that's like ultimately like why I created this infill deal list system, because I can like look at a listing and know what I can do with it immediately. And then I can do further analysis, and I know how to get all the information. I can do like a pretty in-depth analysis in 5 minutes on any property.
Wow.
And that's, you know, yeah.
that is a superpower indeed. Now, before we get too deep into the skills, which I do want to talk to you about, let's bring it back for someone who's watching this and they're like, you know, okay, infill, what exactly does that mean? Like, can you give us a little bit of a high level view of infill development and what advantage people have if they're going to look for that kind of stuff in their markets?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, infill development, all it is basically new development already within city limits where all the infrastructure already is. So it's not going out and buying 40 acres out in the country and putting in 200 houses. It's putting in anywhere from adding an ADU on your property in that's already in city limits, all the way up to there's some of these larger infill projects are, especially in older neighborhoods or older cities, I should say. You don't see a whole lot of this in Boise, but infill can also be, maybe somebody goes out and buys an old hotel or motel and turns that into multifamily housing. That's also infill development. Or like what we deal with in Boise is mostly these smaller, it's usually around an acre, give or take. And then you're adding density to that housing. So there's quite a few actually in Boise where there's a house that sits on an acre, and a lot of people within city limits anymore don't necessarily want to be sitting on that acre. So they want to, they're selling it, and then we can go in and maximize the density and add housing to that acre. And the great thing is the development costs are pretty low compared to, developing out in a field somewhere, because all the infrastructure is at the street. So you might have to extend that infrastructure, but it's a lot cheaper than having to bring it in, a mile down the road, or even, for, 5 miles throughout the subdivision that you're creating. So, so the per lot cost is a lot lower, which makes your profitability typically higher too. But it does come down to what you're paying for the land ultimately too.
So if I'm hearing you right, when you say infill development, that's actually bigger, or it's like a different model than like the bigger ground up development, mostly because you're taking something that's already there existing and really maximizing the use of what's already existing. Sometimes it's going to involve tearing down the house. Sometimes it's going to involve splitting it and building around it. But at least for here in the Boise area, what do you see as the most typical example of like an infill?
Yeah. So, a good example is, a lot of people are adding ADUs to their property. That's about the simplest thing, especially now that they've relaxed the ADU rules. But the typical thing that we see is, either vacant lots or houses that sit on larger lots, and not even necessarily an acre, but like maybe it's a house that was built in 1950 and it sits on, and it's just a little 800 square foot house, but it sits on 4 original platted lots, and there's 2 lots that have nothing on them. It's just a large lot, and so you can build on those 2 lots. That's where you see in Boise like a lot of the skinny row homes, because they're skinnier lots. And so that's what we typically see, especially in the older neighborhoods like the Bench, Southeast Boise, North End. In fact, right across the street from me over here is 4 lots that they're going to start construction on. That was just a vacant lot that I think they tore down like a single family house at one point. And now, they're building 4 additional homes. And so, yeah, pretty much that's most of the time you see between 2 and 4 units going up at a time. Okay. And then you do see some of these larger developments where they're on an acre or so that are, you end up getting 10 to 20 units on there.
So as you've seen the city of Boise and really the entire Treasure Valley area grow pretty significantly in the last, I would say, it seems like 2020 and all the COVID stuff really drove a lot of people to this area. And as that attention, it's kind of almost like, COVID put Boise and the Treasure Valley on the map. Before it was like Idaho, most people are like, Idaho, okay, whatever, potatoes or whatever. But I think a lot of people discovered that this area is actually one of the nicest places to live in the entire country. And, the word's out now, right? So I guess I don't have to worry about saying it. But, there's a lot of money that's coming here. But do you still feel like the Treasure Valley still has opportunity for infill and development like this?
Yeah, I mean, especially with the new zoning code, like when they passed the new zoning code at the end of 2023, so we're not even 3 years into it yet, and there's not a whole lot of people that understand it and understand how to take advantage of it. In fact, I know a lot of people that were doing smaller infill stuff like minor land divisions that got frustrated because they changed that part of the code. So that actually made minor land divisions harder, but then other stuff got easier. So like, it took some people out of the game, but then also there's just not enough people that understand it. So there's only, maybe a dozen guys in the Treasure Valley that are doing what I'm doing at the scale that I'm doing. I would say even at the scale I'm doing, it's less than that. It's probably, it's probably 6 or 7 guys that are doing the quantity that we're doing. And then, there's a couple guys that are bigger than me, but my goal is, and we're in that trajectory where we're going to be doing, we'll probably be the largest infill developer in the Treasure Valley. But yeah, there's definitely a ton of opportunity. And again, going back to kind of what I brought up earlier, which is, the fact that I basically created a system where we can help individual investors, get in and participate in the infill development opportunity and space without being developers or builders themselves. So, I realized basically at the beginning of last year, I can only buy so many deals myself every year. And then, they take, development takes a lot of capital until eventually you get paid, 3 years down the road. And so I realized that like I can only do so many deals myself, and I was seeing so much opportunity basically like slipping through the cracks, not to other developers, but just people buying properties that have no idea what they can do with them at all and have no intention of developing them. And so I saw just a ton of opportunity where an individual investor can go buy that single family house, and we can split 2 lots off of it, and they can build 2 houses on it. And it's the same investment for them as if they were to buy a rental, except now this infill opportunity for splitting 2 lots, they're making, well into the 6 figures on it. Or they're creating rentals that actually cash flow. And so they can turn, one door into multiple. I have multiple projects where we're turning, one door into, 4, 5, 6, 7 units.
Wow.
And that those cash flow then where you can't buy a cash flowing rental right now without putting 40% down. Basically, you're buying your cash flow on it. So,
Right. Yeah.
So what we're doing is we're creating that value because, I still get paid as the developer and builder, but because if you're able to buy a house and you're not paying any extra for the land, well, once you create that extra value in the land, that translates into the final product, and you're actually adding value as you go too, even as you're building.
Mm-hmm.
And even typically the time on the market is creating extra value as well. That's not always the case, but most of the time it's the case.
Because you're saying the property values are going up.
Yeah. So like, in a 1 or 2 year period, that's not always going to be the case, but typically in a 3, 5, 7 year period, that's going to be the case over the long run. So, as you're developing a property in 3 years, if you don't hit, there's, periods of time where, you might buy it and then it, you have a downward trajectory, but that gets canceled out anyway by the value you're already creating. But most of the time, over 3 years or longer, you're actually, you have that time in the market that you have that increase in price anyway.
So with that, I mean, you just said a bunch, and I think that it's great because I think a lot of people don't understand how you can take dirt, or that infill dirt at least, and you can actually create these value situations and these value add, and cash flowing situations, literally by just developing that existing dirt and utilizing the zoning codes that are already there. It's not, you don't have to go down and fight City Hall on this. This is what they want to see happen. And, I think real estate is a very, very broad term, right? There's all kinds of things that are involved in real estate, but for the most part, people get into real estate for one of 2 reasons. They want to create cash flow or they want to create long-term wealth. And from what I'm hearing you say, you're saying you can do both with these types of infills. So can you, we could talk all day long, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what you and I are going to be doing later this week, but can you just maybe give people an example of like what you're doing on Fridays? Because you're doing a live on Friday. I think it's posted in our Treasure Valley Real Estate Investors group, but tell people a little bit about what you're doing in those lives.
Yeah, so my Friday call at 2 p.m. It's our I call it Find Your Next Six-Figure Infill Deal. And so what we do every Friday around noon, we send out our infill deal of the week, and that ranges anywhere from a single lot split, and then it goes all the way up to these mid-sized developments. And so we basically just find whatever the best new deal on the market that week is. 90% of them are on the MLS. It's just most people don't see the opportunity because they don't understand the zoning and they don't understand what you can do with it. And there's a lot of reasons about because they just don't understand, building or development or zoning. So there's, very unique skill set that takes to realize those opportunities. But we find those opportunities, we present them to our list of people that, that follow us. And so we have our infill deal of the week. And then on our Friday call, we cover that more in depth. So we send out a one-page deal sheet that has the really basic, synopsis of the deal, like how much it costs to develop it, what we're going to do with it, what the returns look like. And then we cover it more in depth in our Friday call. And then we also we do a little bit of education in that call at the beginning. We also cover other deals that are on the deal on the list that week. And then kind of go into any other questions and question and answer session as well.
Awesome. I've actually, I think that's the first place that I actually officially met you, was jumping on one of those lives, just because I said, hey, this guy keeps on posting these things in my group. I want to go check it out. And I came in and I was shocked. I was like, man, how come there's not more people in here doing this? I was getting a real estate education right here in my local market, but also it was really making me think of a lot of opportunities that I probably, just because I didn't know what I didn't know, if I could go back, I would have definitely tried to pursue some of those places, those opportunities, even in other places and markets. So I really think that we could continue this conversation for another couple of hours, but I like to keep these Tuesday talks just that. We like to keep it a talk, just kind of move on. But if people want to learn more about you, connect with you, find out more about what you're doing, I know you said you have the Friday lives, but you have a website, you have social, where can people go and find you?
Yeah, I think, the best place is just look me up on Instagram or Facebook. Facebook, Zach Matson, or Instagram is probably a little bit easier. It's that Flippin, FLIPPIN guy, all one word. So that Flippin guy on Instagram. And then on Instagram, you can, there's, links then to my website, matsonhomebuilders.com. But that's more of if you want to, and we'll update that here in the next month too, to kind of more closely follow what I'm doing. But ultimately the Instagram is where I'm posting the majority of everything that I do, and then that is kind of a gateway to everything else that we have going on.
Right on. Okay, so we'll post some of that in the links here in the chat as well, in the comments. But just as we close out, if you folks are in the Treasure Valley area and you are interested in learning more about this, I'm going to be having Zach Matson come in, and we're going to be talking kind of a tag team conversation. And Zach's going to be bringing in some slides. He's going to be actually bringing some real live deals that he's worked on, some stuff that some case studies. We're going to have a fantastic time this coming Thursday night. So today's Tuesday. You've got 2 days left to come sign up. And I know it's going to be probably standing room only, because the last couple of times we've done these meetups, we've filled up the room really quickly. So I think, especially with this being out, I think there's a lot of people that are interested in new construction as a vehicle for investment. So I've already gotten a great response. We have a couple of seats left, and I do mean a couple, because the last time, I think last month, it wasn't quite as much, because I got the notification out last second. I think it was the day of the meetup. I was like, oh yeah, I should probably post something. But every time we've posted about this meetup here in the Treasure Valley, with any kind of advance notice at all, we have packed out the room, and we have actually had people standing on the back wall. So if you guys are interested in coming and seeing some of the real life examples, some case studies that Zach's doing, real deals here in the Treasure Valley, better go ahead and get registered. It's the Treasure Valley Real Estate Investors Group, or TVREIGroup.com/meetup. I'm going to drop that into the comments as well. TVREIGroup.com/meetup. And you got to get registered, because we're only letting people have RSVP'd into the room. So Zach, I'm looking forward to seeing you in the flesh, in real life, on Thursday evening. We're gonna have a great time. It's gonna be a full house. And any parting words or any thoughts for everybody? If anybody's thinking about getting into real estate, investing in infill development, is there something you just want to like say? Hey, listen, if there's one thing I could tell you, it's
Yeah, I mean, I think number one is if you haven't had your ears or eyes open to infill development, uh, it's understandable because there's literally no information out there. So I'm trying to change the game with that and just get the information out there and educate people, but also create a system in which people can take advantage of it. Because right now that system doesn't exist. It basically, you have to learn it yourself. That's what I did. I went through the hassle, and luckily my brain works in a way that I kind of dove right into it, and I loved it. Most people don't, but I've created a system that makes it easy for people. So definitely stay tuned. I hope I'm sure people will love the in-person stuff. But if you're not in the area or you can't make it, definitely follow me on social media and follow what I'm doing, because ultimately I know what I'm doing right now. Like, I haven't spent any money on advertising or anything, and we've, kind of been gaining steam every single week. But if I were to drop ad dollars on what I'm doing within a matter of weeks, I'd be so busy I wouldn't even be able to do anything. So that's partly why I haven't done it. It's because I know that there's so much opportunity in what I'm doing. It doesn't exist out there. And it's a better opportunity than 95% of investment deals out there. So, I'm excited for it. I can see where the trajectory is going with it, and I'm like literally on the cutting edge of where it is. So I'm excited about it.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I love the fact that you're coming at that from the standpoint of someone who has gotten into real estate, kind of on the lowest level, so to speak, which is, I guess, the lowest rung would be wholesaling probably, or bird dogging. But you house hacked, you got into flips, you were doing multiple projects, and then you just saw this opportunity, and you've really gone in there and done the work that is very difficult, and most people wouldn't do it. They want to be doing fun stuff, and what paint colors and what lighting are we going to pick out, not what does the new zoning law say. So I think you're really on to something, Zach. I appreciate you coming on today. I'm really looking forward to getting to know you and working with you on something here very soon. We're already working on some stuff, but Thursday night, you guys, if you guys appreciated Zach, then make sure you give him some love in the comments. Give us a thumbs up or something to show some appreciation. This is great value today. And Zach, thanks for joining us today. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to seeing you Thursday night. Thanks, brother.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Thank you.
All right, God bless. Hey, folks, if you're at all interested in this, what Zach is talking about, then make sure you get signed up on the RSVP. It's going to be a full house. I believe we're going to pack the room out again. And I know that this may not be for everybody, right? Some people are just like, I don't know, it doesn't seem like it's, feasible for me. I think you might be surprised if you come out and actually meet Zach in person, see what he does, and see how actually, especially for those of you that are interested in kind of long-term, you can sit on your money for a little bit. Some really, really great opportunity with the infill development stuff and new construction. So make sure you register, tvreigroup.com/meetup. I dropped the link in the comments. And if you guys have any questions about this, go ahead and post your questions in the comments. We will be talking to Zach at future reference. And I am looking forward to just seeing him more and more. And hopefully, like I said, we've got a project we're looking at working on, him and I, right now in this Treasure Valley area. And I'm hopeful, and I'm anticipating that it's going to be Zach's skills and the knowledge that he has is going to make this even possible for me to even attempt to make an offer on this property. So, guys, it's all about who you're around. It's proximity. You guys know I did my proximity event a couple of years ago. That one event, to get in the room with different people, has literally changed the trajectory of certain people's lives. And I don't say that like as if it has anything to do with me. It's just about getting around people that are doing things that they understand, they're in their niche, and they're willing to share that and let you get in on it. So hopefully you guys got value out of today's live stream. If you did, please give us a thumbs up. Say thanks, Zach. Let us know what you learned. Give us a takeaway. and then share this link with other people who are thinking about real estate, especially if they're here in the Treasure Valley. Let us know if you're coming to the meetup, and we will see you guys soon. Thanks a lot for joining us, and talk to you later. God bless.